Hello there, very good evening to you and welcome to Vantage Point. You may be aware that there were a number of developments that took place over the week, and today to speak about those developments and to have an analytical approach, we've got Dr. Jayatilaka with us, joining us again on Vantage Point. A very good evening to you, Doctor.
Good evening to you too, Stephanie.
Let's just jump right in. Well, the President seemed to have a lot of opposition towards the VAT increase, the VAT hike to 15%, and he seemed to be having a leftist approach towards this, where he doesn't want to give in room for corporate greed. And we also see that this comes in the wake of the IMF meetings. Do you think there is some sort of connection between the two?
Well, Stephanie, we are facing a very serious problem. The problem is that there is a sense of stagnation. There's no rapid progress in the realm of development, nothing new happening, nothing real happening in terms of development that people can see and the economy can feel. That's one thing. The second thing is that there's a crisis of decision making. There's no go-to guy. You know, even the corporate sector feels that nobody's willing to make a decision. There's no clear chain of command. There are multiple centers of power, and therefore there are multiple dysfunctions. So that contributes to the first thing, nothing is happening. And the third is there's the debt trap, there's a debt crisis. Now, some of it is inherited debt from the Rajapaksa administration, but we didn't feel it at that time. So they were managing, the Rajapaksa administration seemed to have been managing the debt much better. And then we have the $6,000 million in debt, new debt taken by the new government, with very little to show in terms of actual development. And what was that used for? So you have the government, the new government, therefore, moving in two different directions. There was a visit to China, and as a result of the visit to China, you have the idea of a debt equity swap. Now, we don't know whether the Chinese will go for it, because there are news stories in the foreign press that the Chinese are wondering about the sustainable profitability of it, but in the main it looks like they will go for that debt equity swap. But it also means that the Chinese footprint, which the UNP government was complaining about, is going to be larger than it ever was under the Rajapaksas. So then the question arises, if we have to pay more for the delay in the port city development, for instance, why did we delay? Why does the country and why do the people of this country have to suffer for somebody's stupid decision to halt this, when now it's going to be resumed and it's going to be bigger than it ever was, because you owe the Chinese more for having delayed. So that's one thing that we are doing, and that's a mixed blessing. I'm glad the Chinese are back, because we needed to recognize the reality that only they have the money. But we wasted time and we ran up a lot of debt during that wasted time. At the same time, the government is going to the IMF. Now, it must be admitted that under the Rajapaksas, we didn't go to the IMF. Something was happening that was right, so we didn't have to go to the IMF. Maybe it was that we were able to leverage the Chinese better under the earlier administration. Maybe. Now we are going to the IMF because we have payments problems. Now, how did that happen all in 1 year? And the IMF package, any IMF package, involves conditionality. The government might say, and governments do say, no, there are no conditions in this, but they agree to do certain things beforehand in order to qualify for the money. Then they agree to do the rest once they get the money, and all the money isn't given at one time. These are what are known as tranches in separate payments, and every one of those tranches has conditions attached, and all those conditions affect the people of this country. For instance, if you are downsizing the state sector, you are shedding employees, those guys are going to be unemployed. If you are going to pay them, if you are going to give them a golden handshake, then you are going to have to spend more money, which you don't have, which is why you went to the IMF in the first place. But if you don't give them a golden handshake, you're going to have, all kinds of problems, including you're going to be tied up in the labor tribunal.
It's interesting that recently the Ceylon Electricity Board was actually eyeing to privatize. It also comes in the backdrop of the whole IMF deal, the austerity measures that are being taken and the conditionality like you mentioned. What do you think about that?
The problem is one of management, not ownership. It's perfectly possible, I believe, to manage enterprises more profitably without necessarily handing them over to the private sector in entirety. Because the private sector, you can't blame the private sector is driven by the profit motive. But if you hand over public utilities to the private sector, then they are going to be run on the basis of profit, which means your electricity, your water, your basic public utilities. Public utilities in the hands of a profit-driven company, especially if it's a foreign company, is a very serious matter. I mean, it affects, if there's a hike in electricity, there are poor families that won't be able to have the lights on all the time. And that affects the capacity of little children to study. So there are all kinds of downsides to this. That's not the way to go. The way to go is to run the place more efficiently and profitably. And sometimes, in order to do that, you have to have a round table with the trade union and say, we are going to offer you shares. Now tell us how you think this place can be improved. We'll tell you what the problems are, seated where we are seated, and we think you guys are wasting money or whatever. We'll tell you what our problems are as management. You tell us what your solutions are and what your problems are, and let's work out a consensus. That's how you do it. But that's not the philosophy of this UNP government.
Well, Dr. Jayathilaka, there has been much talk about the Panama Papers and how offshore companies were actually operating within the jurisdiction of the nation. And we also saw Finance Minister Avikarna Naika making a statement at the G24 saying that he has given authority to all institutions to investigate into these Sri Lankan companies which are slated to have been involved in the whole irregularities and wrongdoings. And we see contradicting statements being made by different officials within the government itself. There's at one point we saw ministers making statements saying that Sri Lanka doesn't have a proper mechanism to trace these accounts back to the original owners. And we also saw some of the other officials say that they have the names and there are 20,000 odd offshore accounts that are revealed to be operating in Seychelles itself. What is this whole dilemma about? Why is there so much of delay in giving out the names or even revealing what companies these are? Because at the end of the day, it's the public money, it's the taxpayers' money that is being siphoned out of the country.
Well, Stephanie, in the first place, Prime Minister David Cameron has an account. And he says it was set up for him by his father. Now, I don't like David Cameron's politics, I don't like his policies towards Sri Lanka, but I really don't think he's a crook. So, this issue of offshore companies is in a kind of a grey area. From his argument, the fact that you put money in an offshore company, enabling you to have a higher return, is not illegal. There is no way to show that this is black money. These offshore companies are far from illegal. They are well known, established things. So you can't necessarily conclude that this is black money made by illegal means and that it should not have been in that offshore company, because those offshore companies, I mean, earlier you put it in a Swiss bank with only a numbered account without a name. That was the old system. Now it's moved offshore. The government of Sri Lanka, I saw this new government, wanted to have a British financial hub here in Sri Lanka, which would pretty much function as an offshore hub. So that's what the new government wanted to do. Now, there's a second question. Where are the Rajapaksas? Because I've seen the names on Colombo Telegraph of all the Sri Lankan account holders, the full list of Sri Lankan account holders.
It could be shell companies.
It could be, but there isn't the slightest whiff. I mean, they've got a fellow who was supposed to be close to Minister Champika Ranaka, who is now resigned. But where are the Rajapaksas, or the Rajapaksas intermediaries, or the Rajapaksas proxies, or anything to do with the Rajapaksas? Where are they? Homeland Security couldn't get them. If Homeland Security, which Mangala Samaravira spoke to John Kerry and brought into Sri Lanka 1 year ago, couldn't find the Rajapaksa black money, and if it's not in the Panama Papers, then I'm asking myself, does it exist?
But the Panama Papers have not released the names as yet. As in, there's an offshore database that was released in 2013.
The database, the Colombo Telegraph has pulled out all the Sri Lankan names and put them, listed them, and nobody is written in saying, no, that's not true, my name shouldn't be there because I'm not. The names are there. They are in the public domain.
That was something that was revealed a couple of years ago.
And there is
during the
no
Rajapaksa regime. That's in 2013.
The Panama Papers scandal broke a few weeks ago.
Yeah, but the names are not out yet.
Maybe not all. Well, the names, the Sri Lankan names, and the names of any politician, because they've talked about Assad's cousin. They've got the Icelandic guy, the PM. There's a campaign against Cameron. So all the big names are already picked up by the international press. They say there's some connection with Putin, but again there's no name. They're looking for it. There's nothing. They talk about the Chinese, but again, the speculation. There's not even speculation about the Rajapaksas in the international press. So, then the question arises, what's all this fuss about? And if the government of this day says, well, now we are going to investigate all of this, my answer is, hey, don't you have something better to do? Because you're obviously not doing very well on the economy, that's why you're thinking about 15% VAT. So why don't you start doing something instead of wasting our time with this nonsense? Because it's not even a sideshow, there's nothing important there that otherwise we would have known from the international press. So, isn't there anything better these guys have to do? Or are they going to waste more time and taxpayers' money chasing the Panama Papers?
And Dr. Jayatilaka, so what do you think is the way forward for us? Which alternative route should we actually take in order to hit a benchmark?
Overall?
Yeah. Economically?
Everything. Well, I think that the best way I can sum it up is to endorse totally what President Barack Obama said in a very serious speech. This wasn't a TV talk show, no disrespect intended. This was his speech to the West Point Military Academy. And President Barack Obama, as we know, was formerly a professor of constitutional law at the University of Chicago. So in that, he gave a prescription about policy. And that prescription was very simple. It's just a few words. 4 words. Don't do stupid stuff. That was President Barack Obama addressing the creme de la creme of the US military, the graduating class at West Point Military Academy. That's what I'm telling this government. Don't do stupid stuff. And you've done a lot of stupid stuff in the short while you've been here. And that's why we are in this economic mess. Don't do stupid stuff.
Well, we'll come back and we'll bring in more analytical approaches to our economy and politics when we meet again. Welcome back. Well, Dr. Jayathilaka, there's a difference between devolution of power and federalism. There's a thin line between those two units. And we see the opposition eyeing on a certain power unit as of late. What do you think about that?
Well, by opposition, I think you mean the official opposition, the TNA. That is the opposition with 16 seats.
That's right, the official opposition.
It's an anomaly, but anyway. We have two sets, not divergent, but two voices saying variants of the same thing concerning the constitutional reform process. The Northern Provincial Council, headed by Chief Minister Vigneshwar, has said that the North had a separate unit, it was a kind of a separate kingdom before colonialism got here, and therefore it has a right to have not a separate country, they haven't gone that far, but self-determination, and they propose a two-unit model for Sri Lanka. That's what they call a Tamil state and a Sinhala state, that all the provincial councils in the south should be abolished and amalgamated into a Sinhala state, not country, but like in Tamil Nadu. So you have a state, a Tamil state in the northern east, and a federal system. That's the Northern Provincial Council position, which they are going to vote on the, one of these days. Then you have the TNA picking up on that. They're talking about a federal system officially, and Mr. Sambandhan was seen on news telecast addressing an audience in Tamil, saying that the fact that the government and the international community is embarked upon, and the international community is encouraging a new constitution, means that they have recognized that there was a just cause behind the LTTE's war. Now, Stephanie, both these statements, Justice Vigneshwaran's and Mr. Sambandhan's, they are very questionable. If you take Mr. Sambandhan's point, the LTTE's slogan or cause behind the war was Tamileelam, setting up a separate independent state of Tamileelam. So I don't see how the constitutional reform process is a recognition of the justice of that call. But the fact that Mr. Sambandhan thinks so or chooses to say so is a very serious problem. It's one thing to say, look, the war is over, there were root causes, we're trying to address some of them, we have to do some reforms. It's another thing to say, look, there was a just cause behind the LTTE's 30-year war of terror, and it's a recognition of that we are trying to make constitutional changes. So, two different starting points. And you start in the wrong place, you're going to wind up in the wrong place. Mr. Sambandhan and the TNA, Mr. Sivaji, they all call for an explicitly federal system. Now, we have a problem there because federalism is not a bad thing depending on time and place. But a small country, the north of which has co-ethnics with Tamil Nadu, which is only 19 miles away, is not a place where you can or should have a federal system. What you should have is devolution. And devolution means that the center shares power outward and downward, but that power is revocable. I mean, not arbitrarily, but with the 2/3 you can take back the power if it is being misused by the peripheral unit. Federalism means that it's not a single state where we are all one and we share power outward and downward, but that we are actually a collection of units, a union. We are not one, we are a union, and we agree, we consent to be together, but some of the power that we give the units, or whatever power we do give the units, cannot be taken back by a center without the concurrence of that unit. So if, for instance, we've given power to Chief Minister Vigneshwaran and the Northern Provincial Council, which passed the genocide resolution and is now going to pass this other resolution, and they do something in pursuit of their obvious beliefs, we can't take that power back without their permission. That's federalism. Now that is a very dangerous setup to have in a small country like Sri Lanka, next door to Tamil Nadu.
So don't you believe that if a set of people come together on the basis of their shared ideas and values and culture and historical values, that they would operate more efficiently than being separated?
Well, they are being separated, aren't they? Because, I mean, if you take a set of people, I would say that the people who inhabit this island are one people. They are the inhabitants of the island of Sri Lanka. Now, that is a common identity. We all share the same space. Now, look at this place. You're all sharing the newsroom. But if within the newsroom, you decide, okay, the women are going to be separated, the men are going to be separated, the ones with moustaches are going to be separated, the Muslims, the Tamils, the English-speaking ones, and so on are going to be separated, you're going to break the whole newsroom up. So, it is the larger identity that we share on this island that is the most important. Now, that doesn't mean that the distinct cultural specificities must not be recognized, but that cannot be the basis of forming a separate unit, because then you're going to break the whole world up. On that basis, everybody who finds something in common with somebody else is going to ask for a separate state, and then you're not going to have India because they're all going to break up, or Europe. Britain is going to be in a couple of pieces. God knows what will happen to the United States and the rest of the world. So we'll be all fragmented. And as we can see in the Middle East, fragmentation means you can't really agree on what your territory is. So it's permanent war. It is in the cause of Tamil, of such an arrangement, that we had a 30-year war. So fissure, fragmentation is not the way to go. Recognition of difference and respecting difference is important, but while giving greater emphasis to what we all have in common. Now, if we were to, in this arrangement here, if we were to have some partition because you are a woman and I'm a man, then you're not going to have a program. But we have a common purpose which transcends our different biological identities, because we are not reducible to those biological differences. Similarly, we are not reducible to our linguistic differences. So that's why I think that fragmentation is a very bad idea. It's a recipe for permanent violence, permanent conflict. You have to build higher, larger, broader unities. And certainly in terms of Sri Lanka, it should be all of us who are citizens of this space, this island. That's what we have in common. Now we can and must recognize certain distinctions, but that can be done through devolution of power, a certain measure of devolution. Now, when you grow up in a house as a family, everyone should have a separate room, I believe, for privacy. But that doesn't mean that every family member has to have a different house. Certainly not while you're growing up. Then you're not a family. So it's like that. Everyone must have their individual space under one roof and upon one foundation.
Well, on that note, we wrap up this edition of Vantage Point. If you need to comment, you can certainly follow our Twitter handle at Newsfirst_in, and you can meet us next week, same time, same place.